In this section, I'm going to briefly discuss masking. Now, to mask an object, you would just come to the mask section of Amorphium by clicking mask at the top of the screen. And you'll notice that when you do that, when you do come into mask, that the object will be white. Now, the reason the object is white is because there is no mask. White indicates that the object is unmasked. Now, when you mask an object, what you're doing is assigning an area of an object that is going to not be affected by the tools, effects, height, shop, and paint. Now, to do that, there are many different tools, and the first tool at the top is your mask brush, which is basically works similar to the paint brushes, but it's going to paint a mask. So I'm going to leave my, let's make it actually the radius a little bit smaller, and I'll go ahead and paint a mask on here. So here I'm going to paint like what is like kind of a T shape on my object. So now I've masked off this section. You can see that this is kind of a soft brush paint of a mask. Now if I come into tools and I use my brush tool here and go ahead and push on the surface of the object, I'm going to make my brush big so you can see this a little easier. If I start pushing on the object, you can see that it's masked off the areas that I had painted to where now it didn't affect those areas. It's actually keeping those areas intact, but it's allowing me to push on the other areas around it. So basically, with a mask, it'll keep from affecting that area. And that works also in effects. If I were to come into effects here and change the scale of the object, you'll notice that the mask is keeping that section intact. It's not letting me change that section. Same thing with any of the distortion tools. So if I were to twirl the object, you can see I'm twirling it, but that particular section stays where it is. This also works with paint. And you can see as I start to paint on the object, it's not going to let me paint on that section. And that'll work with height shop as well. Now, there are many different types of tools for doing masks, and so let me undo this. I'll go back to a front view here of my object. And now, the next tool down is a unmask brush. So if I did mask a section or most of the object and I wanted to unmask just a section of that, it does the opposite of the mask brush. It actually unmasks, which it makes sense. So now in the mask toolbar is the only toolbar in all of Amorphium that you actually find two tools sharing one little square here. You'll see I have a tool on either side, and one is for unmasking, which are these three, and these others are for masking. Now if I want to unmask a section, or say like I might want to mask a whole section of an object, let me just undo this. I'll mask a whole, like say I want to mask one side. I can draw a square out and mask one side of the object, or mask an area. Now one thing to keep in mind too is that with the paintbrush, as I paint here, this is only painting on the front of the object. If I look at the back of the object, it is not painting on the back because the paint is just hitting the front. But with these four tools here, it cuts all the way through the object. So if say this was a character head and I wanted to just mask off one of the eyes, if I did that, it would mask the back as well. So keep that in mind when you're using these four tools, that it is going to cut through all the way through. So if you want to just use the circle tool to grab the front of an object, I would suggest that afterwards to make sure you always check the back of the object, and if you want to get rid of that, then use like the unmask brush and paint it away, so that you're not masking by accident the back of your object when you don't want to. Now the third tool down is the smooth brush, and this allows me to use a brush to actually soften the edges of my mask. Or if I want to soften the whole thing as a whole, there's this soften, like smooth mask tool, where I can just click in the window and it will smooth it as a whole. You can also invert your mask, so instead of having to draw a square and lining it up exactly, I can just, instead of just drawing a square and trying to actually have to line it up and make sure I grab exactly the other half, I can use the invert mask. Just click in the view once I have it selected, and it will invert my mask. Now there's one more split tool, and that's for unmasking everything or masking everything. So if I wanted to unmask everything and start over, I can do that. Or say I want to have everything masked except for one little section, I can mask the whole thing and then start to unmask the sections I want to work with. And so I would suggest playing around a little bit with masks and the things you can do with masks, because you can get some interesting effects that you wouldn't otherwise think you can do by masking off sections and then doing various effects to it. And that's basically how masking can be used to affect your objects.